So a few months ago, actually more than a few months ago, this was actually last semester, I posted a video called Why You Shouldn't Do a PhD. And if you haven't seen that video already, I will link it above. But in that video, I basically just go over a few reasons you might consider not doing a PhD. And the reasons that I gave in that video were very like broad, sort of like wide lens questions that you just might want to ask yourself before deciding to do a PhD. But in the comment section of that video, I got a question that honestly, I'm sure it was rhetorical. Might have even been like a troll comment, honestly. But the person asked if I ever did a video on why you should do a PhD. And when I first read that comment, I was like, well, no, duh, because my answer is gonna be you shouldn't. But it did make me think about like sort of my own reasons for doing a PhD. Because even though in my why you shouldn't do a PhD video, I sort of like just very briefly explained that like my experiences that I've had in my program so far as a PhD student have mentally, emotionally, and any other Lee you can think of, gotten me to a point that if almost anyone asks me if they should do a PhD, my answer is probably going to be no. Like, unless I absolutely think like it's impossible for that person to reach their career goals without a PhD, I'm probably going to say no, you shouldn't do one. However, even though that would be my response, I know within myself that I still, despite everything, don't really regret my decision to do a PhD. I thought that was an interesting thing to think about. And so I was like, well, why don't I? Like, why do I still feel like this was the right decision for me, despite the fact that I would tell literally almost anyone else not to do it? And so that brought us here to this video, where I'm basically going to be saying reasons why maybe, possibly, you might want to consider pursuing a PhD, but also these were my reasons, is what I should say. These were my reasons for doing a PhD that might translate to your life as well. So here we are. Hey, hello, my name is JoJo and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. Now, before I get started, as always, whenever I do a video like this, I always like to preface by saying I'm literally just a person on the internet. You do not have to listen to a single thing I say, and my only goal in making this video, in all of my videos, my only goal is to make this journey, this process, this experience more transparent for people who might be considering starting a PhD program. So with that, let's get on with it. So the first reason you might want to consider pursuing a PhD in clinical psychology, and one of the main reasons I decided to do it, was for the training opportunities. When I first decided that I wanted to like pursue being a psychologist as a career, I, at that point in time, hadn't really given much thought to like whether or not I wanted to specialize in something. All I knew at the time was that I wanted to work in mental health care. And so I did my research. I looked up like what kinds of psychologists work with mental health. I started reading specifically about clinical psychology, and like the sorts of training you get when you're in grad school. And that was sort of like the thing that drew me to clinical psychology initially, was that I was so unsure about what I wanted to specialize in, or if I wanted to specialize at all, that I thought a doctoral degree in clinical psychology would give me the best opportunity to explore a bunch of different avenues within clinical psychology without necessarily having to make a decision right away on what I wanted to do. And so like in most clinical PhD programs, you get sort of a little taste of a lot of different things. There are a few classes that are mandatory for you to take, sort of basic psychology courses that will give you the foundational knowledge for like different subfields within clinical psychology. And then from there, you can really start to explore the areas that are most interesting to you. Clinical psychology programs are also, I think, the only psychology programs that give you direct experience with assessment. And that was also something that I thought I might be interested in. Also, as a clinical psychology PhD student, you go on different externships for a few years, which is another way to get very direct training experience in different areas that you might be interested in. You can decide to extern at a child psychology site. You can decide to extern at a geriatric site. You can decide to extern at a VA. So the training opportunities you could get in a clinical psych PhD program are opportunities that you might not be able to get in other programs. The second reason you might want to pursue a doctoral degree in clinical psychology is for, oh my God, that's loud. Is for the career opportunities. I've mentioned this in a few other videos before where I've talked about clinical psych PhD programs, but one of the major benefits of getting a clinical psych PhD is that it gives you like the most freedom in terms of career options. So once you get a PhD in clinical psych, there are sort of like two immediate pathways you can take. You can either decide to do the clinical route and work as a therapist, or you can take the academic route and work in research. And there's even a third option where you can decide to merge or do both clinical work and research, which is an option that I've heard is quite difficult, but there are people who do it. And after you make those decisions, the options branch off even further. And another good thing is that you can sort of like, I wouldn't say move freely between these options, but because you do have that doctoral degree, you do have the option to sort of make a switch in your career sort of whenever you want to. So you could start off doing research and then decide, hey, research isn't for me anymore, and then make this transition to clinical practice if you're licensed. If you're not licensed, then you would have to go through the process of getting licensed first. But if you are already licensed, you could just make that transition from research to clinical practice, and vice versa, though it's a little bit more difficult. If you are working in clinical practice and decide that you want to start doing research again, you can find a university that will hire you, and you can start doing research and start your own research lab and work with students and slowly start to build up your academic CV. So really, like, the career opportunities that you'll have if you get a doctoral degree in clinical psychology, it's probably going to be the most flexibility you'll have out of any sort of like mental health therapist sort of career track. The third reason you might want to consider pursuing a doctoral degree is money. Possibly. I want to put that out there. Possibly money. And what I mean by that is everyone thinks that if you are a doctor, you automatically are raking in like six figures. And that is not true. It can be true, but it is not true for everyone. Whether or not you are raking in a lot of money as a clinical psychologist is mostly dependent on what you actually decide to do with your degree. And that goes back to my previous point about career flexibility. I don't know the figures for like every avenue you can possibly take, but I think it's pretty safe for me to say at this point, based off of what I know, the more likely outcome after getting a degree in clinical psychology is that you may be able to live comfortably. Just comfortably. That is like the most likely outcome. You are not necessarily going to be making hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. I'm so sorry. But there are ways to get closer to that salary depending on what you decide to do after you graduate. For example, psychological assessments, neuropsychological assessments are very lucrative, especially child assessments. I have heard through the network of my program that there are people out there who charge upwards of $10,000 for one assessment. And granted, they can do that because they are probably really good at what they do. They've been doing this for a long time. People trust their work. Also, assessment is a very time-consuming process. There are interviews you have to conduct. There's tests, hours and hours of testing that you have to do, hours and hours of scoring and report writing that you have to do. So it's not like the person doing the assessment is charging $10,000 for a couple of hours of work. They're charging $10,000 for what could very easily become 20, 30 hours of work. And so like there are people who go into assessment and do 2, maybe 3 assessments a month, and they're set. The other side of that is like if you decide after you graduate and get licensed that you really want to work in the community and you want to like work in a nonprofit or a community clinic, you have to be prepared to know that like you're not going to make as much. And that's just the sad reality of the world we live in. And then as far as research goes and like academia goes, again, there's also sort of like that spectrum. Like you could be on the lower end of that spectrum where you are, an assistant or associate professor at a university and you're conducting research and you're getting paid decently, and you're getting paid enough to live comfortably. Or you could be on the higher end of that spectrum and you could be a tenured professor or someone whose research just ends up being absolutely groundbreaking, that people are just throwing money at you to do more research, or you're getting booked for talks and conferences. And there are ways to earn a lot of money as a clinical psychologist, but just know that like it's not a guarantee. Okay. And finally, the last reason you might want to consider pursuing a doctoral degree in clinical psychology, and one of my primary reasons for doing it, is just like if you really, really love it. I will admit that the research aspect of it all is not my favorite part of my program. I've said over and over again that like the clinical work is what really like keeps me going. I love working with patients. I love talking about patients. I love supervision. I love all of that. But I am someone who like really strongly believes in research informed practice and research that leads to mental health equity for all. And for that reason, like the research that I do is so closely intertwined with the kind of clinical work that I want to do later on in my career that I can't fully do now because of the fact that I'm in a program, but that I know is like a goal that I want to work towards. That is what makes my PhD program worth it for me. Is like at the end of the day, even though I don't particularly love doing research, I love the kind of research that I do. And like because of that, it's tolerable for me. And so like despite everything else that goes on in my program, and despite everything else that I put up with emotionally and mentally because of my program, when it comes down to it, like I know that there are things that I'm doing as a student, as a trainee, as a researcher, as a therapist that make everything else feel worth it. God, I'm like trying not to get emotional. Even though this program has been really hard for me so far, I would not change a single thing because I love what I do. I truly feel like this career is my calling. And so like, that is why, even though I would never tell anyone else to do this to themselves, I know that for me, I don't regret this decision in the slightest. So yeah, I'm gonna stop talking now so that I don't cry. Okay. So the bottom line here is all of these things are just factors that you need to take into consideration to decide whether or not pursuing a PhD or PsyD in clinical psychology is the right decision for you. I've said this before. In my time on this journey, I have considered giving up many, many times. But for me, when those thoughts cross my mind, there's just something within me that knows that that's not the decision for me and that I have to keep going. For other people, They could be partway through a PhD program and realize that it's really not for them and they don't need or want to be here. And so that is the reason why I make these videos, so that you can have as much information about what the process is like before you decide to jump in and realize halfway through that you absolutely just hate it here and that you made a bad decision and now you're possibly thousands of dollars in debt and have wasted several years of your life. I think it's really important for me to be honest about both the good and the bad for that reason. And so I hope that by me doing this video really demonstrates that like there are both positives and negatives to every experience. And it's really just up to you to decide what you're willing to go through and put up with to reach your desired outcome. So yeah, with that being said, thank you for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. I truly appreciate it. Leave me a comment down below if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. As always, like, share, and subscribe, and click that little notification bell so you don't miss my next upload, and I'll see you in my next one.